Next up, competitor number 7, automated classification of acetabular shape and ultrasound for diagnosis of DDH, automatic alpha angle, and the rounding index.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Abhilash, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher working at the University of Alberta, and I work on this project on hip dysplasia. So, hip dysplasia is a congenital deformity which affects 1 in 1,000 of infants who are born with a poorly formed hip. The problem with hip dysplasia is that the top portion of the ball and socket joint in the hip is so poorly formed that the loads of the body is not balanced in the proper fashion. So the historic way of treating hip dysplasia or diagnosing hip dysplasia is by physical examination, something that's called the Barlow or Ortalny maneuver, in which the clinician actually tries to dislocate the hip and waits for a slight click sound and diagnoses the kid as dysplastic or normal. Now, the problem there is that that's very subjective and it's very poorly repeatable. A much better approach is using two-dimensional ultrasound, as you see there. And people come up with a calculation of the alpha angle, which is the angle that the hip bone makes. Now, what's the problem with two-dimensional ultrasound? Simply, it's impossible to repeat a two-dimensional scan of a 3D structure 2 times. So it purely depends on where the sonographer places the ultrasound transducer. Now, if he places it at a slightly different location on the bone, he gets a totally different diagnosis. The solution is simple: to use 3D ultrasound, which is so commonly available. And what we are trying to do is to come up with a model, a segmentation model, which gives the hip shape from the 3-dimensional volume. And from this volume, we can now calculate indices which indicate whether the hip is dysplastic or not. As you can see on the I'm sorry for that. That was supposed to be a demonstration. As you can see that it's completely screwed on screen. But what we're trying to do is to segment the bone from that shape from the ultrasound volume. And we are able to segment the structure. And based on these 2 calculations of the alpha angle and the rounding index, which indicates the shape of the acetabulum, we come up with a diagnosis that it's either a normal hip, a dysplastic hip, or it's somewhere in between. So the future plan is to integrate this with one of the commercially available ultrasound systems so that it's more like a plug-in, so that the clinician can do this at the time of the initial scanning at childbirth, because you have a window of 3 to 4 days. And if this is part of the routine, then it can be potentially a good application in ultrasound.
Thank you.
Questions?
Was the question on the sensitivity and?
Yeah, the sensitivity, the accuracy, the positive predictive value.
Yes, we did have that on the poster. So we did the study on a set of 114 round hips, and we do get almost 96% accuracy when we use a combination of these models. And in fact, the rounding index is something that has been used in the past, but it's not been quantified, in a sense that that's basically what a clinician looks for, because he knows that a rounded hip is more likely to be dysplastic, just that from the 2-dimensional image, he doesn't have a way to quantify it. But once you have a 3-dimensional shape, you can actually quantify it with a value. So that's partly the reason for the high amount of accuracy that we get with these indices.
I have a question over here. Can you comment on the market size as well as how much you're able to sell this for and who you're selling it to? And as well as a follow-up question to that is, can you comment on the makeup of your team and the sales and marketing experience that you guys might have?
Yeah, sure. I'll take the first question, like the target client of this application. It's possible to sell it in two ways. The first is obviously to market this to every single hospital, which is the long route. But what we are actually targeting is to have this as part of an ultrasound system. So the client would then be an ultrasound manufacturer who takes this as an add-on module. So that would be our way ahead. And we're working in an educational institution, so we're not actually made an estimate of what the sales and things would be actually. Right now we are filing a patent on the module, on the implementation of it. The future steps would be to make a real-time version that could be integrated with an actual ultrasound system.
Any other questions? Tapping into the medical imaging market is huge. The good news for you, I guess, is that there are other Alberta-based companies that have already done that you can piggyback off on. What's your model look like to go work with them as opposed to going direct to a big company like GE?
Well, it all depends on the kind of understanding that we can get with the manufacturer and the kind of information that these companies are willing to share.
And that they care enough.
Sorry?
And that they care enough about what you're doing.
Yep, that's true. That's true. And the critical thing is the kind of the accessibility to the data. So as you said, that if it's possible to get a good quality 3D volume, that would be more critical for us.
All right, sounds like based on Max's conversation this morning, going to the end patient and the parents might be a good way to think about that too. Thanks very much.